So let me now move on to talk about private transport. Given our land constraints, we must press on with vehicle ownership and road usage measures to manage traffic congestion. Our intent is to take a calibrated approach in managing the growth and use of private transport, and where necessary, adjust our policies and pace of implementation. For example, we have phased in more gradually the reduction in the annual vehicle growth rate, deferred the adjustment for past over projections of the COEs, removed taxis from the bidding system, and exercised some flexibility for ERP in the evenings and on Saturdays. So let me first touch on the topic of COEs. We have and we continue to receive many well-intentioned suggestions from the public, as well as from members like Mr. Cedric Foo, Mr. Hari Kumar, Mr. Lim Biao Chuan, Dr. Lim Wee Kiak yesterday. And they include ideas to recategorize COEs according to whether it's OMV, value of the carbon emissions of the cars, to allow only individuals and not dealers to bid, to tighten financing for cars, and so on. Please be assured that we take all these suggestions seriously. We will study them thoroughly and respond at the appropriate time, sometimes with our sister agencies like the MAS. That said, I would like to take the opportunity to address some of the key feedback that we frequently receive. First, I do acknowledge that with changes in technology, using engine capacity as the criterion for COE categorization may no longer be so valid, and we will study this further on how to improve this. Secondly, there are calls to do more to level the playing field to buy a car. As Cat A COE premiums rose, I received more requests to give priority in COE bidding to families with elderly members, families with children, allow only one car per household, and so on. And I note also that Mr. Gan Tiam Poh had a suggestion in Parliament last week for a family car COE category. I understand the aspirations of many Singaporeans to own a car. In fact, about 45% of households today already own a car, and this actually had increased over time. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I would like to share this slide with members. 40% in 2008, rising to 45% of households in Singapore owning a car over 2012. I would have to say that this trend is simply not sustainable due to our land constraints, and so we have to limit supply and find some equitable way of allocating it. We believe that our COE system remains the most appropriate way of allocating this limited but non-basic resource. By and large, the COE system today already accommodates some social equity considerations. Car quotas are divided into large and small car categories, using engine capacity of 1,006 as a simple but generally well-accepted basis for the classification. With this, buyers who wish to have smaller cars need not compete for the COE bidding with those who desire larger cars. But outside of this 1,600cc divide, we try not to impose other social considerations in the COE system to avoid distorting the market further. Our approach has been to try to address social considerations largely through the vehicle tax structure, in particular the ARF. Consistent with the approach, the Ministry of Finance recently announced changes to make the ARF structure more progressive. So in the past, it was 100% ARF for all cars based on the OMV. And I'm sure you will remember from the announcement 2 weeks ago that we have introduced 3 categories, and for the ARF rates to be tiered from 100% to 180%. And this means that buyers of luxury cars will now pay higher tax rates than buyers of budget cars. It is a difficult undertaking to try to allocate cars based on needs, such as to raise a family, to ferry elderly family members, or for work purposes. Setting aside the likely problems with implementation and loopholes, I think it would be extremely difficult for the government to decide fairly who deserves and needs a car and who does not. So I would say that while our bidding system is by no means perfect, I think it is certainly preferable to some of the other suggestions that we have received, like converting it all to a balloting system. In Beijing, there is a lottery system for car license plates. Over 1 million people enter the lottery for about 20,000 license plates every month. There have been reports of buyers who have never won the lottery, little wonder why, despite entering it every month since it started more than 2 years ago. Or buyers who had no intention of purchasing a car in the first place, save for the fact that winning the lottery has become a lot more lucrative. There have also been reports of buyers who get their license plate on the black market for maybe about 30,000 Singapore dollars. In contrast, and similar to another Chinese city, Shanghai, our COE bidding system does allow people who want and can afford a car to do their sums, save up, and buy one eventually, and not be left to the vagaries of balloting system. And I think that this is the prudent way to go about buying a car, given that it is a big purchase and a depreciating asset. Those who want to go for a less expensive option can consider off-peak cars. Mr. Lim Biao Chuan has rightly suggested that we try to do more to promote them. Today, owners who wish to use their OPC during the restricted hours have to pay $20 for an electronic day license. And this is regardless of whether they use it for just half an hour or, say, the full 12 hours. We will review the feasibility of making the scheme more flexible and attractive when the technology is available for us to price it differently. There have also been requests for us to smoothen the supply of COEs to stabilize COE premiums. COE premiums are influenced by many factors, both on the demand and supply side. I think some smoothening of COE supply is a good idea to temper the peaks and troughs of the supply cycle. The difficulty is, of course, how to do it without causing other problems. I have asked LTA to see if there is a practical way of putting aside some of the supply from the upcoming peak that we expect in the next few years, I think starting from 2014, to save some of it and put it aside for the future when COE supply becomes tighter. This is a longer-term study, and I assure you that we will not be making major changes to the COE market in the near term. For businesses, we have reviewed with MOF what we can do to help them with rising business costs. As announced during the budget statement, besides a 30% road tax rebate, we will also relax the COE renewal rule for commercial vehicles to help owners with their cash flow. Currently, at the end of the 10-year COE, if owners want to renew their COE for just 5 years, they can do so only once. We will remove this restriction for Cat C and allow these owners to renew their COEs for another 5 years. And this will also apply to those who are already on their first 5-year renewal. And LTA will release more details on this later. We'll continue to review what more we can do to help businesses, especially SMEs. We will look into Mr. Gan Tiampo's suggestion to split the COE category for commercial vehicles to separate light goods from heavy and very heavy goods vehicles. But one implication is that since additional subcategories mean smaller quota numbers, this suggestion may result in even more volatile COE premiums. But I think the intent behind Mr. Gan's suggestions is really to ask if smaller light goods vehicles should pay the same COE premium as heavy and very heavy goods vehicles. And this is something that we will study carefully. As there have recently been major changes that affect vehicle ownership, I think it is best that we let them take some time to settle. We have not even seen the outcome of the first COE bidding exercise after the implementation of the progressive ARF and loan restriction measures, which is going on this afternoon even as we speak. And it will take a number of bidding exercises before the effects of the recent changes become clear. Therefore, we will take some time to carefully consider the many suggestions we have received from MPs and the public before we make further changes to the COE system. Let me move on to talk about ERP. With COE premiums reaching new highs, a common refrain is for us to shift our emphasis to restrain usage. So in the past it was, ERP charges too high, control the car ownership and so on. Now I think we are hearing a different side of the equation. So to those who are now championing aggressive usage measures like ERP, I hope to get their fuller support if we see the need for more extensive usage of the ERP in future. The ERP system has served us well since its introduction in 1998. Despite the vehicle population increasing by over 40%, we have managed to keep our roads relatively free from congestion, with traffic speeds remaining largely in the optimal range. Dr. Lee Biwa last evening, Mr. Sia Kemping this morning have reiterated their calls to abolish ERP in the evenings and on Saturdays. Since the ERP rate reductions were made in October 2011 and in June 2012, we have generally observed heavier traffic flow and thus lower traffic speeds in the time slots where we had cut or removed ERP rates altogether. We have no plans at the moment to remove ERP altogether in the evenings and on Saturdays, as it is clear that ERP is still needed to manage traffic congestion. Without the ERP, motorists, as well as bus commuters, will encounter more congested roads in the evenings when they go home and on Saturdays when they go to town. Nevertheless, let me assure you that wherever it is possible, and we will certainly continue to see where we can fine-tune our ERP policies at the margins. Let me move on to talk a little bit about car sharing. I understand that from time to time, Singaporeans do like to have more convenient door-to-door options to get around for family outings, shopping trips, ferrying elderly parents to medical appointments, for example. We can and we will do more to facilitate these transport arrangements and options. Car sharing is indeed one example. With higher COE premiums, more people have taken to this option to gain access to a car without having to own one. Membership of car sharing organizations now stand at 8,000, which is an increase of about 33% compared to a year ago. The LTA is working with HDB to make car sharing more accessible in the heartlands where it is feasible. To facilitate peer-to-peer car sharing, LTA will study if there is further scope to liberalize the private car rental scheme. This private car rental scheme currently allows car owners to rent out their cars on weekends and public holidays. Let me move on to talk about taxi services and availability. Mr. Singh Han Tong had filed a number of cuts on the role of taxis in the transport system and how to improve it further. Taxis serve specific point-to-point travel needs and can therefore, we know, provide a higher level of service compared to mass public transport. As Mr. Singh pointed out, taxis also help to meet the transport needs of the infirm and the elderly. And in light of our aging population, and as we continue to constrain car growth and car usage, taxis will play an increasingly important role. And this is why we had initiated a strategic move to make taxis more available, to utilize the taxi fleet more efficiently, and for taxi operators to meet higher levels of service. I believe the better the quality of taxi services, the more likely some car owners may be prepared to give up their cars and switch to the train or buses for their daily commute, while opting for taxis for the occasional trip. Today, taxi companies are required to meet the quality of service standards set by LTA, which cover areas like call booking and safety. I assure Mr. Singh that LTA reviews the service standards regularly, taking into account commuters' experience on the ground. The LTA will also consider overseas best practices and is looking into the possibility of benchmarking our service standards with that in other cities. LTA has in fact tightened the service standards just last October. The revised standards include higher targets for call booking performance and vehicle inspection passing rates, the latter for safety reasons. Generally, most of the taxi companies have been able to comply with the revised standards so far. LTA will continue to monitor this and work closely with the taxi companies to achieve even higher service levels in future. I should add that even before the service standards were revised, there had been some improvements in service levels. The average answer rate for call bookings was better in 2012 compared to 2011. The average passenger waiting time at key taxi stands had also improved over the same period. For example, the average waiting time in the city from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. fell from about 6 minutes in 2011 to about 3 minutes in 2012. And I think these improvements may, in part, have been attributed to the December 20 taxi fare revision. Dr. Lily Neo and Mr. Sing Han Tong asked about the impact of the taxi availability framework, which was announced last August and introduced at the start of this year. I think it is too early to draw definitive conclusions. In any case, the longer-term and more stringent standards will be gradually phased in over 3 years. 70% of the taxi fleet in each company to meet 250 kilometers usage, 250 kilometers driven this year, and increasing to 80 and then 85% in subsequent years. We will continue to monitor the results and improve the framework as necessary. If the standards are so successful that taxis start to affect traffic flow, then it is a happy problem that we will be happy to look more closely into. But I do assure Dr. Lily Neo that it is quite unlikely, as our 28,000 taxis comprise less than 3% of our total vehicle population of almost 1 million. Mr. Singh also asked about the long-term plans for taxi COEs. Today, they pay the Cat A prevailing quota premium, or PQP, for COEs, although the COE itself is drawn from Cat E. We have only recently made these changes, and as you have rightly pointed out, taking them out of the bidding system had, well, the opposite effect on COE premiums to what people had suspected, that the premiums had actually gone up, and the conclusion therefore may be that the taxis bidding in Cat A in the past may indeed not have had such a big effect on the rise in premiums that others had suspected. But these are early changes that we have made, and it will take time before we see the full effects, and we will review the impact at the appropriate time. Lastly, Mrs. Lina Chiam last evening suggested to bring back the taxi ownership system, the individual ownership. I think it's actually instructive to look at how our taxi industry had developed over the years. Prior to 1970s, taxis were indeed owned by private individual owners, and since then, all new taxis had to be registered under taxi companies, and individual ownership of new taxis was disallowed. The aggregation of taxis under taxi companies mean that they are better organized and able to leverage on economies of scale and resources, provide enhanced service, and better meet the changing demands of commuters, say, for example, in call booking. Our problem today is that we have actually too many taxis that are not efficiently used, rather than too few. We have one taxi for about every 200 persons, so 5 for every 1,000. Hong Kong is about half this rate, likewise for London, and in New York, it is about probably 1.5 taxis for every 1,000 people, higher than many other cities, and that's our rate today. So it is better for us to see how we can strengthen the performance of our 7 existing taxi operators, make better utilization of the fleets that are under their charge, rather than allow ad hoc individual players back into the market. Madam, please let me take some time to briefly update members on some of our major road projects. First, the Marina Coastal Expressway, or MCE, is on track to be opened by the end of the year. The MCE will link the East Coast Parkway to the ECP and the Kallang Paya Lebar Expressway, KPE, with the AYE in the west. This will allow motorists a seamless east-west connection without going through the city centre. And when the MCE is completed, the part of the ECP that connects to the AYE will become part of a network of arterial roads that will serve that area. Second, to make better use of our scarce land space for roads, LTA will study the feasibility of a reversible flow traffic scheme. I think some of you, old enough to remember, will recall that Nickel Highway had something similar to this in the past. This is actually ideal for stretches where traffic data shows a tidal pattern, where traffic is heavy in predominantly one direction during the morning peak hours and in the opposite direction in the evening. We have identified the Kranji Expressway, Pan Island Expressway stretch connecting the residential areas in the north to jobs in the west as a feasible corridor for a reversible flow scheme. The LTA has awarded a contract for advanced engineering studies engineering consultancy studies, which are now in progress. And third, since the alignment of the 22-kilometer-long North-South Expressway was announced in 2011, LTA has commenced some advanced works and awarded 3 advanced engineering consultancy contracts. These consultancy contracts will guide major construction works, which we plan to start in 2015. In future, the opportunities to build more roads will become more limited. While we will still expand local road networks to provide access to new developments, we will prioritize road widening in local areas for bus lanes, as our priority is public transport. We must be careful not to widen local roads beyond what is absolutely necessary, as they will encroach into the living environment of residential neighborhoods, cause more dust and noise pollution. So we will do this judiciously, and wherever possible, we will make sure that priority is given to public transport. Let me now move on to the topic of green transport. The land transport sector will do its part to mitigate climate change and promote environmental sustainability. The CEVS scheme, Carbon Emissions-Based Vehicle Scheme, was implemented at the start of this year. Under the CEVS, low-emission car and taxi models are given incentives in the form of rebates off their ARF. Dr. Lim Wee Kiat asked during the budget debate if it had made a difference. And today, others have also said that we ought to put more consider having a COE category for vehicles of this nature and put more COE quota into this category. Let me share with members of the House what the take-up rate had been like over the first few months. Close to 50% of cars registered in the first 2 months qualified for CEVS rebates. Obviously, a much higher rate of over 80% for Cat A cars and a quite respectable 20% for Cat B cars. So 50% of the cars that were registered in the first 2 months qualified for some form of CEVS rebate, from 5 to 20,000. This is more than double the 20% that would have qualified for rebates in 2011. So we use the 2011 data because we suspect that in 2012 there might be some pent-up demand, that people sorted away for the introduction of this scheme. So 50% may have been distorted by the accumulation of pent-up demand, and we will have to monitor this in the coming months. But I think we have seen some shift to more environmentally friendly cars. I therefore believe that it has some effect to encourage more buyers to choose low-emission models. And in total, for those who are interested, we have given out $13.5 million in rebates in the past 2 months. We will watch the take-up rate closely over the next 2 years because we promised that we will review this scheme towards the end of 2014 and after we have seen how it's transformed market demand. LTA will then review the scheme based on its impact on purchasing decisions, advances in vehicle design and technology, as well as the progress of Singapore's overall carbon mitigation plan. For commercial vehicles, as was announced by the Minister for Environment and Water Resources, the LTA and NEA will implement an early turnover scheme to incentivize owners of pre-Euro and Euro 1 diesel vehicles, which are the oldest and most pollutive diesel vehicles on our roads, to upgrade to the cleaner Euro 5 emission standards. The details of the scheme will be announced over the next 2 months, and we will see how the take-up will be thereafter. So let me conclude on this segment. We will continue to innovate and make improvements to the way we optimize road usage. We will introduce advanced technology to manage traffic in the years to come, regularly consider ways to refine our vehicle ownership measures to improve their effectiveness. The opportunities to build roads will become more limited in future, and when we are able to do so, we will give priority to buses even as we expand those roads. We will continue to facilitate more travel options and help people to make more environmentally friendly choices to meet their travel needs. And in so doing, we hope to transform private transport in Singapore to keep our people and the economy moving. Thank you, Madam Chair.